Good afternoon and welcome to National PTA's webinar called Safe Drinking Water in Schools, What Families Should Know. My name is Heather Parker and I'm the Senior Manager of Health and Safety at National PTA. I'll be facilitating today's webinar. Before we begin, I want to review the functionality of GoToWebinar. Right now, everyone is on mute. If you think of a question during the presentations, please type it into the comment box located here on your webinar dashboard. We're going to hold question and answers until the end, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can in the time allotted. I also just wanted to let you know that we are recording this webinar, which I plan to post on the Safe Drinking Water webpage on pta.org tomorrow. It will also be posted on National PTA's YouTube channel. So I was hoping to introduce Derek Bird, our chair of National PTA's Health and Safety Committee. The committee is hosting this webinar. Unfortunately, Derek has not been able to join us yet. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed, and when he's able to join, I'll be sure to introduce him. So for more than 100 years, National PTA has been advocating for the educational success of all children. It is one of our fundamental beliefs that all children should have access to healthy, safe, supportive, and inclusive learning environments so that they can focus on achieving academic success and preparing for their futures. Every family expects their kids to have access to safe drinking water at school. Unfortunately, that is not the reality in many communities across the country, where dangerous levels of lead have been found in homes and schools. Although progress has been made by federal and state governments to reduce water pollution through the Clean Water Act in 1972 and to ensure tap water safety through the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974, recent water contamination incidents across the U.S. highlight the fact that children, particularly children who live and learn in high poverty communities, may be exposed to lead-tainted water in their homes and schools. The EPA warns that even exposure to low levels of lead can cause developmental and educational problems. And Derek, I see that you joined the webinar. I didn't know if you wanted to say hello to our attendees.
Yes, hello and good afternoon to everyone. Sorry for the delay.
No problem. I didn't know if you wanted to review the goals of today's webinar.
Sure. On behalf of the National PTA's Health and Safety Committee, we wanted to take this issue today and really help those who are having some concerns about safe drinking waters in their communities and specifically in their schools to really get all of the information and details on how to better advocate for safe drinking water, which is a position that the National PTA currently has. And so our goals for today, basically, for both PTA volunteers and family members, are to gain a better understanding of the issue of lead-based drinking water in school, and to also identify the signs and the symptoms of lead exposure in children, and how best to advocate to change some of these respective issues within your communities, and what are the current tools that are available to increase access to drinking waters in schools. So I'm very pleased on behalf of the National Health and Safety Committee to bring to you today our webinar. And our first presenter is Dr. Christine Hecht, the Senior Policy Advisor at the University of California's Nutrition Policy Institute, where she leads work on drinking water access and consumption. In addition to engaging in research on drinking water access and promotion, Dr. Hecht coordinates the National Drinking Water Alliance, which includes organizations and individuals from across the U.S. who are working through policy, advocacy, research, and strategic action to ensure that all children can drink safe water in the places where they live, learn, and play. Christina, thank you for presenting today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak today, and thanks, Derek, for the introduction. I'd just like to add that I was an active PTA parent for many years at my children's schools, and was president for 4 years at Malcolm X Elementary School in Berkeley, California. I'm very proud of that. Today I'm going to give an overview on tap water and more specifically tap water safety. I will include information on what's being done at the state level and some thoughts on what you as PTA parents and leaders can do. Slide please, Heather. Before we start, just a reminder on why we are working hard to promote drinking plain water instead of sugar-sweetened beverages like sodas, juice drinks, and sports drinks. There are many ways to hydrate your body, but water is the healthy way. With 0 calories and no added sugars, water is important for oral health. Good hydration has been shown to improve cognition as well as mood and attention span, and of course it helps to promote healthy elimination. When you drink water instead of sugary beverages, it can help you maintain a healthy weight and reduce the risk of diabetes type 2 and metabolic problems like fatty liver disease. Slide please. Studies show that children tend to be underhydrated. That is, they don't drink enough. Water is the healthiest way to hydrate. So we want to build good access to safe water. Slide please. This is how we think about the steps to make plain water a beverage of choice. We want to start with confidence that the water is safe. We need to make access easy and effective. And drinking water education and promotion help people understand about healthy beverage choices and help make plain water an appealing choice. Studies show that children are more likely to consume water when it is promoted. Slide please. On this webinar, I will talk about step 1, safe drinking water. What's going on out there and what you can do about it. Slide please. How does your water get to the tap? This little chart, a primer on plumbing, shows water pathways. Most homes and institutions receive water from a local water utility. The public water utility is responsible for the quality of the water it provides and is required to make that information public. You can check on your utility's water quality by reading the annual Consumer Confidence Report issued every July from the utility. I want to emphasize that 95% of utilities in the U.S. supply safe water to their customers, and 90% of schools get water from the utility. When water comes from a well, the well owner is required by law to perform regular testing for water quality. But lead enters water, or can enter water, farther down the line. Plumbing parts and fittings, if made of or with lead, can leach lead into water as it travels through service lines and in buildings. Older buildings tend to be at higher risk. In most cases, the water utility treats the water with agents that prevent this leaching. That's called corrosion control. Part of the problem in the Flint, Michigan water crisis was inadequate corrosion control. Slide please. Why are we hearing so much about tap water safety these days? Well, it's not only in Flint, and it's not only lead, although we are focused on lead today. This map represents media coverage we've found in the past year and a half on tap water safety issues. The purple and green dots represent lead contamination in tap water in schools and homes. For example, you can see a green dot for Flint, Michigan. Red and blue dots represent other types of contamination in tap water in schools and homes. So you can see there are some purple and red dots out there, and this is why more attention is being paid to school tap water safety. Slide please. This summer, USDA issued a memo calling on its regional offices and state agencies to ensure that children in the National School Lunch Program and Child and Adult Care Food Program child care homes and centers have access to drinking water that is both free and potable, that is safe. Also, the American Academy of Pediatrics issued a policy statement recommending that state and local governments should take steps to ensure that water fountains in schools do not exceed water lead concentrations of 1 part per billion. This 1 part per billion goal is an important public health goal. The District of Columbia has already adopted this low level and plans to add filters to all public school drinking water outlets. EPA's current action level for lead is 15 parts per billion. The best way to know that water out of a particular tap is safe is to have it tested by a certified lab. Slide, please. We don't have federal law that requires testing at the tap for lead in school drinking water. Developing requirements and protocols to test at the tap in schools and childcare will provide information to find out just how extensive the problem of lead in tap water is. This year, some states took action. On this map, blue shading marks the 5 states that passed legislation in 2016 to provide for tap water testing for lead in schools and childcare. The yellowish shading represents states with pending legislation. Slide, please. Here are some details on state responses to improve water quality in schools. In California, the Water Board will soon require utilities to test for free in schools, and there is $10 million in the state budget for grants to improve access to safe water. Massachusetts earmarked $2 million for testing and provides a wealth of information online. New York State passed and funded legislation requiring all schools and childcare to test and tell or report the results. In Oregon, the State Board of Education now requires every school to develop a healthy and safe schools plan. Schools are not required by law to test for lead, but they are required to report how they are preventing lead exposure. And Rhode Island passed a law requiring testing and assurance of the safety of drinking water in all schools, daycare, public clinics, shelters, foster homes, treatment centers, and clinics. Notably, New York and Rhode Island's legislation includes child care sites. As you know, younger children are more vulnerable to the toxic effects of lead. Slide, please. In the previous slide, I used the word tell. The EPA uses this word to mean communicate. Communication out to the community, students, staff, parents, and the broader community is important. Most of the time, water is safe, so when water is certified safe through testing, be sure to say so. We want kids and all people to feel free to drink their tap water. Some sites in the western U.S. are using a symbol called Wally the water droplet on tested taps as a way to let even non-readers know they're at a tap with safe drinking water. It is strongly recommended before embarking on a program of testing to have a media plan in place. Slide, please. The EPA recommends these steps that can be taken as routine, short, and long-term approaches for tap water safety and to mitigate lead contamination if it is present in school tap water. Routine control measures often don't cost anything. Routine maintenance, such as frequent cleaning of debris from tap aerators, can help prevent exposure to lead, as can using cold water for food and beverage preparation. If testing reveals elevated lead levels, interim control measures can also be very affordable. First, of course, is shutting down problem outlets and providing bottled water as a substitute in the short term. Oftentimes, elevated lead can be remediated with a correctly established flushing protocol. Solving the problem over the long term could be more costly, although there are many options. If it's possible to identify the source of the lead, those fittings or fixtures can be replaced. This cost is very context dependent. Installing a filtered water dispenser, often referred to as a hydration station or bottle filler, is not only effective, but provides water that tastes good, so students like to drink it. And in some cases, flushing may be the most appropriate and lowest cost permanent solution. Analysis by experts at Harvard shows that in the long term, it is more cost effective to fix the problem rather than to rely on bottled water. Slide, please. Here are some photos of effective ways to provide safe water in schools. Some schools have one piece of water filtering equipment which is then used to fill water dispensers, which can be as simple as pitchers and cups on the cafeteria tables or the dispensers shown here on the left. The more expensive bottle fillers and hydration stations include filtering capacity. It is important to use filtration systems that are NSF certified and of course to change the filters as needed and to dispose of them properly. Slide please. So what can PTAs do? Here are a few ideas. PTAs can work to put strong language on drinking water in school wellness policy, including safety protocols. PTAs can educate staff and parents. PTAs can encourage school administration to achieve full implementation of the Child Nutrition Act provisions to build effective access to potable water. Many schools have had success with creative partnerships with local businesses or charities to raise funds for hydration stations. PTAs can support events such as a Rethink Your Drink pledge contest or a student fundraiser for a water bottle station. Slide please. We all have a role to play in expecting safe tap water in our country. Slide please. Before I close, I want to let you know about a new resource, the website of the National Drinking Water Alliance. We have created a library of easily accessible resources that are tailored to specific settings, including schools and community. The policy page provides policy information and advocacy resources. Our current Take Action campaign, That Cup to Click On, focuses on water in local school wellness policy. The Access tab will lead you to a selection of toolkits and guides on tap water safety and on improving access to water in schools, including the guide you will hear about soon from Caitlin. You can find drinking water education and promotion materials, including an excellent new toolkit called Water First. You'll also find current news and information about the Drinking Water Alliance, including how to contact us. Slide please. Also coming up next week is a webinar by the EPA. The registration link is shown. Slide please. Thank you very much for your interest in drinking water, the no-calorie, low-cost, and healthy way to quench thirst.
Great. Thank you, Christina, for this great presentation. I know you included two appendices, a graphic on plumbing and potential sources of lead in tap water. So that is included in the PowerPoint presentation that I'll distribute after. So thank you again.
You are welcome.
Okay, so Dr. Maria Fletcher was supposed to be our next speaker, but unfortunately she's sick and is unable to participate. She was kind enough to provide her slides and talking points, which I will present on her behalf. But before I do, I wanted to share a bit more about Dr. Fletcher. She's currently a member of National PTA's Health and Safety Committee, and she's the director of the Department of Nursing at St. Joseph's College. She has extensive nursing experience in public health nursing and maternal child health. She also advocates for population issues and served on several state task forces related to these issues. So at National PTA, we are very lucky to have someone with her expertise on our committee. So the Environmental Protection Agency and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention agree that there is no known safe level of lead in a child's blood. In 1974, Congress passed the Safe Drinking Water Act and amended it in 1986 and 1996. This act is designed to protect public health by regulating the nation's public drinking water supply. The EPA does not regulate bottled water. The FDA ensures the quality and safety of bottled water. So the law requires many actions to protect drinking water. This law requires the EPA to determine the level of contaminants in drinking water at which no adverse health effects are likely to occur with an adequate margin of safety. The level for lead is 0. The EPA has set this level based on the best available science, which shows that there is no safe level of exposure to lead because lead is a toxic metal that can be harmful to human health even at low exposure levels. Lead is persistent and it can accumulate in our bodies over time, where it is stored in our bones along with calcium. Young children are particularly vulnerable to lead because the physical and behavioral effects of lead occur at lower exposure levels in children than in adults. The growing bodies of children and infants absorb more lead than the average adult. A dose of lead that would have little effect on an adult can have significant effects on a child. It is important to recognize all of the ways a child can be exposed to lead. Children are exposed to lead in paint, dust, soil, air, and food, as well as in drinking water. If the level of lead in a child's blood is at or below the CDC action level of 5 micrograms per deciliter, it may be due to lead exposure from a combination of sources. The EPA estimates that drinking water can make up 20% or more of a person's total exposure to lead. Even low levels of lead in the blood of children can result in behavior and learning problems, lower IQ and hyperactivity, slowed growth, hearing problems, anemia, learning disability, poor classroom performances, and lead is also harmful to adults. Adults exposed to lead can suffer from cardiovascular effects, increased blood pressure and incidence of hypertension, decreased kidney function, and reproductive problems in both men and women. So what can you do? First, learn more about the water coming into your home. Most sources of drinking water have no lead or very low levels of lead. The EPA requires all community water systems to prepare and deliver an annual water quality report called a Consumer Confidence Report for their customers by July 1st of each year. Contact your water utility if you would like to receive a copy of their latest report. Second, you can have your water tested for lead. Homes may have internal plumbing materials containing lead. Since you cannot see, taste, or smell lead dissolved in water, testing is the only way of telling whether there are harmful quantities of water in your drinking water. A list of certified laboratories is available from your state or local drinking water authority, and testing costs between $20 and $100. Third, take measures to reduce lead in drinking water at home. Flush your pipes before drinking. The more time water has been sitting in your home's pipes, the more lead it may contain. Anytime the water in a particular faucet has not been used for 6 hours or longer, flush your cold water pipes by running the water until it becomes as cold as it will get. This could take as little as 5 to 30 seconds if there has been recent heavy water use such as showering or toilet flushing. Otherwise, it can take 2 minutes or longer. Your water utility will inform you if longer flushing times are needed to respond to local conditions. Only use cold water for eating and drinking. Use only water from the cold water tap for drinking, cooking, and especially for making baby formula. Hot water is likely to contain higher levels of lead. So run cold water until it becomes as cold as it can get. Note that boiling water will not get rid of lead contamination. Also, check your home for lead-based paint. The use of lead-based paints for homes, children's toys, and household furniture has been banned in the U.S. since 1978. But lead-based paint is still on walls and woodwork in many older homes and apartments. Lead poisoning is entirely preventable. The EPA is responsible for ensuring the safety of the nation's drinking water and public water supplies. The EPA estimates that approximately 10,000 schools and child care facilities maintain their own water supply and are regulated under the Safe Drinking Water Act. There are approximately 90,000 public schools and 500,000 child care facilities not regulated under the SDWA. These unregulated schools and child care facilities may or may not be conducting voluntary drinking water quality testing. Unless a school is a public water system, Testing for lead and copper is voluntary. Therefore, many schools served by public water systems that are owned by cities, towns, and other entities may have never been tested for lead. The EPA strongly recommends that schools drink testing water in their facilities. The EPA strongly recommends that schools collect 250 milliliter samples from water fountains and outlets, and that outlets be taken out of service if the lead levels exceed 20 parts per billion. The sample size was designed to identify specific fountains and faucets that require remediation. The school sampling protocol maximizes the likelihood that the highest concentrations of lead are found. Find out if your child has elevated levels of lead in his or her blood. Because lead poisoning often occurs with no obvious symptoms, it frequently goes unrecognized. You can test your child for lead poisoning by asking your pediatrician to do a simple blood test. Your child's doctor will likely recommend your child be tested for lead levels during routine well-child exams. They usually do a simple blood test. A sample is taken from a finger prick, and then lead blood levels are measured. Higher levels obviously indicate that your child may have unsafe levels of lead in their blood and should have their blood tested periodically. Children with elevated blood lead levels can have serious health effects. If you know your child has lead poisoning, talk to your pediatrician or local health agency immediately about what you can do. Although your home may be free of lead-based hazards, your child could still be exposed elsewhere, particularly if they spend time in a building that was built before 1978. Ask your child's school board or facilities manager if they regularly inspect for lead hazards. Things to look for are the interior and exterior painted areas. Examine the walls and interior surfaces to see if paint is cracking, chipping, or peeling. Check exterior paint as well. It can flake off and contaminate nearby soil where children play. Check the surrounding areas. Be sure that there are no large structures nearby with peeling or flaking paint. Make sure the staff washes any pacifiers, toys, or bottles that fall on the floor. Also, make sure that staff have their children wash their hands thoroughly after playing outside and before eating or sleeping. Look to see if any of the playground areas are dust-free and clean. Check for bare soil and test for lead. Also, older playground equipment may contain lead-based paint. Make sure that paint is not cracking, chipping, or peeling from painted toys or furniture, and also ask about testing all of the drinking water outlets in the facility and on the playground. So any outlet for potable water is a potential source for drinking water. Some outlets are regularly used by students and staff for drinking, cooking, or making coffee. Other, like a mop sink and a utility closet, rarely are used for consumption. With limited funds, priority sampling sites include the drinking fountains, kitchen sinks, classroom sinks, home economic sinks, the teacher's lounge, classroom sinks in any special education classrooms, and never use hot water for drinking or cooking. Again, lead leaches more easily into hot water than into cold water. So in conclusion, remember there are no safe levels of lead. The lead level is 0. Safeguard your children by being proactive in your home and in schools. The future health of all children is at risk if we do not take this simple precaution. Cost should not be a factor in the health and safety of our children. So now that we've learned more about lead and the potential sources of lead in school, Shannon Severe is going to talk about how families can advocate for change in their communities. Shannon is the Vice President of Advocacy for National PTA, where she leads advocacy efforts for National PTA's positions at federal, state, and local levels. She also assists National PTA staff in promoting increased participation in advocacy opportunities among PTA members. Shannon has been an active community volunteer for more than 20 years and a PTA member for 14 years, to include serving on the National Board of Directors as the European PTA President, as well as the Vice President for Legislation. So Shannon, thank you very much for providing your expertise on today's panel.
Thank you so much, and I'm just happy to participate. I think it's great that the Health and Safety Committee pulled all of these subject matter experts together, and I'm just happy to be a part of it. And Heather, thank you for all the work you did to bring us together as well. This is an important topic, and I'm glad we're talking about it and breathing some life into the issue. National PTA has had a long history of advocacy on the issue of clean water and lead poisoning. In fact, dating all the way back to 1976, National PTA has been a leader on advocating for more protection for children against lead poisoning and providing the necessary preventative measures to keep students safe. Despite our efforts, this issue continues to impact our schools and communities. We have continued advocacy efforts for 40 years by pushing policymakers and school leaders to ensure that students are able to learn in a safe and healthy environment, but we've still got some work in this area. Next slide, please. National PTA's stance on clean water is simple, but it's also very important. We support basically 3 prongs: careful preservation and protection of water supplies, effective implementation of local, state, and federal water quality standards, and finally, regular water testing in schools and daycare centers for lead contamination. It's clear that the effective implementation of federal water quality standards is not being met in recent years, and that we need to do more to prevent childhood lead poisoning. It is now more important than ever to advocate for safe water supplies in our nation's schools and in our communities. Next slide. This summer, National PTA endorsed the Get the Lead Out of Schools Act. This was introduced by Representative Tammy Duckworth from Illinois, who was just reelected in November, and hopefully with her work on this topic and with increased pressure from PTA and like-minded associations, we can keep pushing legislation both at the federal and state level. This particular bill would provide the necessary federal mechanisms to ensure that school water supplies are being tested for lead contamination periodically by incorporating schools into the requirements for testing public utility systems. This would have a profound effect on the quality of water that our children are exposed to. We're appreciative and encouraged by members of Congress that are attempting to address this issue, but we also need to make policymakers at all levels work together to protect our children, and that might involve you all on the call. I see there's almost 70 of us now. It's going to involve you all taking the time and the energy to educate administrators, rule makers, lawmakers, policymakers that are within your sphere of influence, and maybe reaching a little bit outside of your comfort level to make sure that the nuances that we've covered in the webinar so far are understood. I think by understanding the different acts and laws that come into play in terms of how water is arriving at a school or a daycare center or a home, and who's responsible for testing it, is anyone responsible testing for it, understanding those nuances and then educating the policymakers and decision makers around you is going to be a key pivot point for us. So my last slide talks a little bit more about this. What can you do as a PTA advocate to improve the water quality in your schools and in your community? At the local level, talk with your principal. Talk with other school leaders about whether they have included free and safe drinking water in the local school wellness policy. If not, work together to include language in these policies to make sure that students in your school and district have a safe water supply. If you need help drafting materials like that, we've got an advocacy toolkit on our website that you can access that not only gives you pointers on how to mount a campaign, how to draft substantive memos, or even op-eds and editorials for publication in a local newspaper. It can help you with all of those, as well as meeting and discussing these important issues with policymakers. At the state level, contact your state departments of environmental protection, health, and/or education to see if they have a uniform standard or protocol for monitoring school water quality. Schools should comply fully with all applicable water quality laws to ensure routine testing in all school buildings. At the federal level, contact your members of Congress and urge them to provide investments and resources for states and districts to properly monitor and test the water quality in schools. After 40 years of advocating on this issue, it's really unacceptable that children are still exposed to lead poisoning and unsafe drinking water at school. There was a lot of fervor and momentum behind getting lead out of our water, out of our schools, even in terms of soil contamination. And we've really kind of dropped off. We need to up the pressure, and then we need to sustain the pressure to make sure that we can close the loop on this. There's no reason why 40 years later we still should be talking about lead in water, lead in schools. It's important that PTA members use their collective voice on this issue to put pressure on school leaders and policymakers to protect students from these types of harmful conditions. Thank you again for joining all of us on the webinar. We all do very much hope that you find this information enlightening and that it kind of spurs you to action. I'm so glad that the webinar is being recorded so that you can refer other advocates to it as a resource. And Heather, I will turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Shannon, for that important presentation and call to action on what PTAs can do to help rally around this issue as well. So our final presenter is Caitlin Merlo. Caitlin is a registered dietitian as well as a health scientist at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, where she serves as the school health branch's lead for school nutrition. She develops science-based guidance and provides content expertise and technical assistance on strategies to improve the school nutrition environment and support healthy eating among youth. So Caitlin, thank you for joining today's discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. It's really a privilege to be on this webinar today and share some of the resources that CDC has to help advance this work around increasing access to drinking water in schools. So each of the other speakers have shared some of the ways that schools can begin to address water access, and this includes everything from new policies to implementing promotional campaigns to building new partnerships, and then also engaging parents and students in that process. So the question is, where should schools start if they're interested in increasing access to drinking water? Next slide. So one of the ways that schools can get started is to become familiar with and use CDC's Increasing Access to Drinking Water in Schools toolkit. We worked with many individuals and organizations to develop the toolkit, and it really just describes the key steps that schools can take to not only meet the federal requirements for drinking water during the meal periods, but to also make drinking water available and accessible across the school campus. The toolkit can be used by a lot of different groups. So it could be a school health council that uses the toolkit. It could be nutrition services providers, principals, teachers, parents, and other school staff who are interested in increasing access to drinking water in the school setting. And other stakeholders can choose to use the toolkit as well, like public health partners, community members, and university staff to really help support the implementation and evaluation of these efforts. The toolkit includes a needs assessment checklist, an action planning template, examples of water promotion campaigns, and other guidance to inform this work. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes just walking through the toolkit in a little more detail and highlighting some of the various templates that are included and how you can use them. Next slide. This diagram describes the process that's outlined in the toolkit to help schools address drinking water. And of course, a great first step is to conduct a needs assessment of the water environment in the school. This can really help to inform the development of a water access plan and then guide some of the activities to improve the water access environment. So let's take a closer look, beginning with needs assessment. Next slide. Because every school is so different, it's really important to spend some time thinking through what specific changes to water accessibility are needed, and then to consider the resources that are available to make the changes, as well as what types of training and promotion will help to ensure that the changes are successful. The needs assessment process that's outlined in the toolkit is very comprehensive, and it includes the steps that are listed on the slide: assessing policies and practices related to water access, reviewing water testing requirements and recommendations, conducting an assessment of the school's water access points, also assessing students and other stakeholders' perceptions about the drinking water, and then identifying key personnel to become water access champions. So the toolkit includes a school drinking water needs assessment checklist and planning guide, which is Appendix 1 of the toolkit, to help navigate this process, and it also provides examples of key questions to consider. So let's take a look at what that template looks like. Next slide. This slide shows just the first section of the school drinking water needs assessment checklist that's in the toolkit. And this section addresses policies and practices related to water access. So for example, some of the questions related to policies and practices in the food service area specifically ask, does the school provide students with access to drinking water during the meal periods, which is required by USDA? Is there a state requirement that students have access to drinking water during meals and snacks? Is there a district wellness policy that addresses this? And then does the district or school have standard operating procedures for placement and filling and cleaning of bulk water dispensers in the cafeteria? So the individual or the individuals that are filling out this checklist should respond to each of the questions, and then they can use the notes section to capture additional details or clarifying comments. So an example of this would be if the school district is working on developing a local school wellness policy to incorporate language on access to drinking water during the school day, you might want to make a note of the steps that are being taken to achieve that or some of the barriers that make it difficult to achieve in the notes section. And this will help to guide you in developing your goals and objectives later in the planning process. Next slide, please. Once the assessment of the school's water policies and practices has been completed, the next step is to develop a drinking water access plan. Next slide, please. The purpose of the plan is to identify strengths and opportunities for improvement in providing access to and consumption of drinking water, develop a list of recommended actions for providing access to and consumption of drinking water, and then identifying goals and objectives for each of the priority actions, and also identifying the individuals who would be responsible for ensuring that each objective is carried out. Next slide. So first, based on the results of your needs assessment process, you would want to make a list of strengths and weaknesses. So for example, one weakness could be that students perceive that the tap water at the school is not safe. Next, based on those weaknesses that are identified, you would want to make a list of recommended actions to address this need, and then select at least one priority action from the list to begin working on. So one example of this would be to form a student committee to help implement a drinking water campaign at the school. Next slide. Next, we recommend using the goals and objectives template provided to identify goals and objectives for each of the priority actions that were identified. So another way to think about this is what are the steps that are needed to meet your priority actions? And of course, when developing objectives, we always want to think about things that are measurable and achievable and specific and realistic, and then also include a time frame by which they will be completed. And it's also important to identify the individual or the group of individuals who will be responsible for helping to implement each of the objectives. So in the example of implementing a water promotion campaign, some example objectives could be to identify a group of 6 to 8 students to participate in the committee to develop the campaign. Another specific objective could be that the student committee will identify 3 to 5 key messages for the water promotion campaign. And then another specific objective could be the committee will develop posters and other materials using the key messages. Next slide. Once the plan has been developed, including the goals and objectives, then the next step is to implement that plan. Next slide. So depending on the goals and objectives that are identified, additional steps may be needed to implement the plan. And the toolkit addresses the following implementation strategies to help schools achieve goals and objectives. And these include opportunities for funding, additional partners to help support the effort, selecting a water delivery method, identifying personnel needs and trainings, developing water promotion strategies, and addressing sustaining your water access plan long term. Next slide. And of course, we want to talk about evaluation because this can really help to improve the implementation of policies and practices and measure changes in the school environment, but also potentially changes in student behavior or staff behavior around drinking water. Next slide. There are two main types of evaluation, process and outcome, and the toolkit describes each of these in more detail. And then it's also important to plan an evaluation that can be used to further improve policies and practices. So the goals and objectives that have been developed as part of your water access plan will guide your evaluation design, including what information should be collected. And the toolkit describes this in more detail. Next slide, please. The Water Toolkit includes several appendices that can help you with your work in this area. So what you see on your screen now is Appendix 2, and this provides an overview of how to get started with water testing in schools, if that's something that you would like to do. And it really reflects federal guidance. So the final box at the bottom left-hand side of the page shows that action should be taken if the water sample has greater than or equal to 20 parts per billion of lead. However, states may have standards that are stricter than the federal standards. You always want to check with your state regulations on this issue of moving forward with water testing. Next slide, please. This is Appendix 3, and it provides examples of different types of water dispensers, including price ranges and then key considerations for each example. So some of these may be more appropriate for certain locations in the school than others. So you want to take a look at this table as well. Next slide, please. Appendix 4 includes responses to common concerns that can come up around increasing access to drinking water in schools. Some of these concerns are that possibly milk consumption would decrease during school meals, that providing cups could increase littering at the school. And so what we did with this appendix is to really look at what research is out there to address these common concerns. Next slide, please. And then lastly, Appendix 5, it provides examples of interview questions that can be adapted and used to find out more about students' attitudes and perceptions about drinking water at schools. If that's something that you're interested in doing to really understand and we know what students think about the tap water at school, these are some great questions that you could consider asking. Next slide, please. So the toolkit is available for download on our Healthy Schools website, and the web address is listed on the slide. We also have recently changed the format of the toolkit, so you can download the entire PDF, but you can also download each chapter and each appendix separately. And the needs assessment checklist is also now a fillable PDF, which is kind of a nice feature. So I encourage you to come check out the website and see what the toolkit looks like, and I hope that it helps inform the work that you're doing in schools. Thank you again for the opportunity to be on this webinar.
Great. Caitlin, thank you so much for the thorough presentation of the CDC toolkit. I wanted to let everybody know that we'll also link to this toolkit from the website pta.org/safe drinking water. I've had it on the bottom of the presentation for most of the time. Here it is again. So now we want to open up the floor to questions. We have about 8 minutes left. So I wanted to see if anyone had any questions for our panelists. If they do, feel free to please type it into the comment box on your dashboard now. And I'll just wait a minute to see if any come in. Okay, we have a question that's coming in now. I don't know that it's to any panelists specifically, so if someone wants to jump in and answer, go ahead. It's how do you recommend we educate parents and the public about the importance of this issue? And all of our panelists are unmuted if anyone wants to jump in.
Well, I'll jump in. This is Shannon. Oh, go.
No, go ahead, Shannon. That's great.
Okay. I think the way that the way that you would go about it is you want to be able to talk to parents in terms that they can understand, and you also need to make it relevant to them. In order to do that, you might have to do a little bit of digging so that you understand how water is being provided to children at the daycare that they use or the school that their kids go to, because depending on how that water is getting to the school, you would point them in different directions in order to advocate either for testing if it's not happening, or for flushing if that's not a part of the practice. You would also want to go to that school's or association's website to see if they actually had a policy on drinking water. So you would want to do a little bit of groundwork, I would think, to make it very simple and to have maybe 3 clear tasks that parent could engage in quickly in order to move the needle on the issue. If I go out into the grocery store or anywhere else and I try to connect with parents and I tell them that lead in water is bad, they're all going to agree with me. But I have to be able to speak with them with some specificity in order to increase the chances that they will be moved to act. And so that does place somewhat of a burden on us as advocates to make ourselves aware of those issues. But if you are able to do that, the likelihood that that parent will be empowered and that they will share the momentum that you've developed and will move the issue forward, if they'll, kind of pick up the baton that you've handed to them, I think that's the best way to approach parents on the issue, and on any issue.
And this is Caitlin. I'd like to just add on to that. I think that's a great response. One resource that CDC has that might be helpful, we have a toolkit called Parents for Healthy Schools, and it's really about engaging parents in a lot of different school health issues, including nutrition. And within nutrition, water is, of course, one of the big issues that we talk about. And so we have a parent idea sheet that talks about, what are some of the key questions that parents can ask to just learn a little bit more about what's happening at the school around water access. And, the great example of, is there a policy in place around allowing students to have a water bottle with them during the school day? Or, is there more than one water fountain in the school, and are they cleaned and properly maintained? So these are just some of the key questions that a parent could ask to learn a little bit more. And then there's also some very specific action items. So maybe, Heather, I could follow up with you with the link to the Parents for Healthy Schools that we could send out to folks.
Thanks, Caitlin, for mentioning that. We actually do have it on the PTA.org website. It's under our families health section. I believe it's on the main page, but I can double check that as well. But it is something that we've linked to. We were asked to contribute to some of that content. So thank you for mentioning that.
All right, thank you.
I want to also add just a little bit to that question, because having been involved for over 38 years, I think this is an opportunity for PTAs to really educate not just their parents and their students, but also the community as well. And there's always opportunities to do that, even if you take this information and just make a brief presentation during the public hearing portion of your school board meetings. Again, that will also make sure that your public elected officials who are responsible for policies that governs the schools in your communities are aware of this issue and are educated. We spend an awful lot of time setting up tables at open houses and meet the teacher nights to do all kinds of things, but never have anything where parents can get information on health and welfare. And so again, that's another opportunity to provide information to parents who gather to come, at the schools for some other reasons, to have this part of your meeting agendas, whether your general membership meetings or your executive board meetings. There's always opportunities to have these issues brought up and discussed briefly so that begin to start the conversation and raise the awareness of what is happening, and to begin to really collectively galvanize individuals and other like-minded organizations to come forward to really support the work that you're doing in any of these areas, particularly around safe drinking water.
This is Christina. I'd just like to chime in and say that in our experience, water is often sort of a hidden issue. It's easy for it to get overlooked. We often take our drinking water and its quality for granted. And another thing that we found is really a problem for schools is fear about funding. You know, they're not sure what they're going to do if they find out they have a problem and they're not sure they're going to pay for it.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, for contributing to that answer. No other question has come in. Christina, there was just a point of clarification on Rhode Island's legislation. It said it has passed. It's not quite as extensive as what was indicated, but it does require testing at schools and daycares. And actually, one more question. I think we have time for just one more question, so I'll leave this one as our last question. Do you have any statistics about the number of schools that have tested their tap water in the past 2 to 3 years and what the results are showing? It's other than schools covered under the federal lead and copper rule.
This is Caitlin, and in our school health policies and practices study, we do ask a question around what the school requires for, or if the school has tested for lead and other contaminants. I don't have the data point off the top of my head, but I can certainly follow up with that. And I don't think there's, I'll have to go back and look at the question. I'm not sure that it asks, you know, what did you do with those results? But let me follow up with you, Heather, on that so that we can get that information out.
Okay, great. Well, that is all the time we have for questions. So I want to be mindful of everyone's time. So if there are no more questions and we are out of time, I'm going to turn it back over to Derek to conclude the webinar. So Derek.
Well, thank you, Heather. And first, let me just take this opportunity to thank all of the panelists who presented today. Of course, Christina, Caitlin, my colleagues Shannon and Heather as well for putting this together and standing in for Maria, Dr. Fletcher, who fell ill today, who was a member of our Health and Safety Committee. And then I want to thank all of you who took the time, who was on today, to participate and really learn and become more informed about this very important topic. And, you know, we tend to always wait until there's a crisis, or as it was just mentioned, that, you know, water is always something that, you know, we just don't really think about how important it is in our lives, and particularly in schools and just in general, you know, how our families and children are impacted by it. And so we really very much wanted to make sure that we are part of this conversation, help move this issue forward. And so one of the things I do want to leave you with today is the fact that we do want to remember that every child deserves access to safe drinking water where they live, play, and learn, and that the National PTA is committed to supporting students, families, schools, and communities in this effort, as the protection of students is of utmost importance, so that every child has the opportunity to reach their fullest potential. And so I would also like to remind everyone who was on that the National PTA has information on this topic on our website, and we have a web page dedicated to this, and you can find it at pta.org/safe drinking water. And then any additional information that is or other concerns that you may have, you can direct those to Heather at the email and phone number listed here on the slide. So again, thank you for your participation. We do hope that you will take this and move this forward in your respective jurisdictions, and we hope that you have a great rest of the day and a happy holiday.